If you're relying on Apple search or Spotify search to get more listeners for your podcast, you are going to be disappointed. And maybe you already are, and that's why you're here. Maybe you thought that just sharing about your podcast on Instagram would be enough until you realize that your diehards are already listening to you and other people just like aren't seeing you or aren't engaging with podcast content. I think anyone that has posted those clips, and I still post those clips, so this is like not a judgment thing. It is hard to get engagement on podcast clips. So where do we go from here? How do we get more listeners for our podcast if our tried and true Instagram is not getting their attention? And we started a podcast because we thought it was search driven, but Apple and Spotify don't really seem to be doing their part, and our podcast has hit a plateau in terms of growth. Hi, before I dive into this, just a quick introduction. I'm Kara. I specialize in building bingeable brands through search-driven marketing. My marketing agency specializes in blogging for small businesses and Pinterest marketing, as well as taking your podcast content for you, helping it go a lot further. And let's be real, Instagram has become a full-time job. You pour your heart into a post, you write a thoughtful caption, and 24 hours it is buried. And that's if it wasn't buried like 15 minutes after you posted it. The algorithm is being flooded by great content all the time, and for some reason, we're finding it harder and harder to get in front of current followers. But the good news is you have a backlog of incredible podcast episodes that you just need more eyes on. My clients, you're continuing to put your highest level of energy into creating really great episodes every single week. You're doing the research, you're getting them edited, you're, looking at titles and trying to tap into psychology and all of the things that you're doing to make your podcast content so fabulous. But even still, and I should say, most people have even seen success with their podcast starts to grow at first, and they even still have people listening to old episodes. So it's not that it's not working, it's just that it is hard to get more listeners for your podcast. That's why I think we have to go to search. And of course, I specialize in search-driven marketing, so of course I'm going to say that. But I want to break down exactly what we do when we have a podcast episode to get it into a blog post, into Pinterest content, and basically create kind of this evergreen funnel that's really simple and scalable and sustainable, especially if you hire someone like me to do it. But don't worry, even if you don't, I'm going to break down my process today. So first, the blog post. I'm going to tell you exactly what I do to turn your podcast into a blog post, because back up a second. Here's what I don't mean when I say turn your podcast into a blog post. I don't mean embed the embed player with a paragraph or two that you use for show notes. That is absolutely not what I mean. What I mean is I will take the audio of a podcast, turn it into a transcript, go through the transcript to kind of highlight the key either questions that I ask if it's an interview, or headings, points if I did a solo episode. So I'll find those, and then I'll take the, body text of what I said in the podcast. I'll clean it up. I'll take out some of the human elements that are easy to listen to that don't necessarily add to a blog post, and I will organize the blog post, add white space, add headings, add images, make sure that it's super readable and digestible. And this matters for a few different reasons. The first reason is, it helps you get found on Google because you're using ideally long tail keywords that you're searching. I personally love to find my keywords before I record the episode, especially if I'm hoping that it's going to be a really SEO focused episode, which not all of your podcast episodes have to be search driven in order for this to be effective for you. Once someone starts listening to their show, they're going to listen to some of those episodes that are maybe more personal, or maybe they don't have a specific keyword that you would want to rank for. This is still effective because it gets people into those more SEO, prioritized podcast episodes. So that's the first reason to do this. The second reason that I don't think gets talked about enough is that it is easier for people to digest and actually implement what you're teaching in the podcast episode. We all know most people are listening to podcasts on their hot girl walk, in their car, in between, like while they're doing the dishes or doing laundry. And it is, while it can be enjoyable to listen to, and while I hope that people are getting really great takeaways from that, the reality is that it's going to be hard for them to implement, right? But what if your 8 lessons to XYZ could then also be turned into a blog post that they can listen to while they're out and about in all those other places? But when they sit down to their computer to work, they're like, oh wait, what did she say again? And they look at the podcast blog post and kind of skim it, get refreshed from what you were saying, and actually implement it. It's a great way to get more impact. And then the third reason is probably one of the most obvious ones that I don't think is talked about, but is usually a pretty important piece, is it really helps with accessibility. Not everyone learns through audio. So I think having that as an extra touch point for the people that follow you, especially when you're putting your heart and soul into content that is your main content, I guess, like you're putting a ton of work into it to make it go farther, to make it go be more accessible for people, and to help people implement, like it is a true win-win. But this is about how to get more podcast listeners, so I will dial it back and just remind you, like, so good to get it on Google for search. Podcasts are, if I'm going to be honest with you, podcasts are really rarely ranked on Google unless they actually have a full blog post with them. Like I have clients that take my advice here and I have clients that don't. And the ones that don't really are using their podcast, blog post, the one with a couple of paragraphs as a landing page. But as somebody who sees kind of behind the scenes the analytics, those almost never rank on Google. Like the competition would have to be so low before Google would prioritize a podcast episode, honestly. So just to sum up kind of my process is I will start with the transcript. I will really break it up to make it more readable in different headings, white space, images, all the things. I'll find keywords that I really want to hit at. One of the ways, like when you ask a question, I really want to emphasize this. So people type in questions to Google all the time. When it's an interview that you're writing a podcast for, you're really going to want to get the question down to something that someone would type in on Google instead of maybe exactly what you said. Because what you might have said is, yes, so-and-so, I totally agree with you, and this is what I might add to it. And then also, what do you think about this? I think blah, 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 blah. What are your thoughts? And then they answer, right? You don't want all that to be in the blog. This is what I mean about cutting those more human elements that are okay to listen to, but they're not necessarily like no one is going to want to read it. We want to keep our best stuff in there. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of how I decide. And also, you're going to want to add your keyword throughout. So I don't think I have another video on YouTube about finding keywords. I'm sure I will at some point, so I'll add it to the description box at that time. But otherwise, there's a ton of great resources out there to find the right keyword. And then make sure it's in your introduction paragraph. Make sure it's throughout your blog post. You can really optimize it from there. I don't know what good keywords would be for this because I covered a lot of different topics. I think it's fine to choose a more general keyword, and then even though it might not super rank on Google, like if it's too vague, different sections can rank for different things. In the excerpt part of Google, that's like when you ask Google and it's like, here's the excerpt, then maybe part of the podcast will rank. Or in the questions area, I forget what that area is called on the top of my head, but when you type something into Google and it comes up with example questions you might be wondering, you can really rank in those spots too, which is cool. And if you're just like really drawing a blank, put the transcript into ChatGPT, ask for some long tail keyword ideas, and then definitely vet them. Like don't take that as like the be all end all. But that can be a good place to start if you're just drawing a blank. And then put them in your SEO tool to see if they're actually getting searched, would be my advice. And then the last part of the blog post is to have a call to action. So because the idea here is that someone will find your podcast on Google or somewhere else, the idea is to keep them as listeners, right? So definitely try to get them to subscribe on Apple or Spotify, have those links there, and then also consider a call to action like download a free guide, or, and this is a big one because there's so much emphasis on email list. And while an email list is important, I know you likely don't need the reminder, but also try to get them to follow you on Instagram. Like it is definitely possible, maybe surprisingly, to grow your Instagram based on podcast episodes that you're turning into blogs. So that's just another added bonus for you. And then let's talk about Pinterest. Pinterest is kind of just like the little magic that happens at the end of it all, because Pinterest isn't social media. Pinterest is a search engine, and it loves fresh, valuable, consistent content creators. So if you are podcasting and like I said, you're putting your best stuff on it, you're trying to get the blog post to rank on Google, why not put that on Pinterest? And I want to be clear here. When you hire someone like me, like I will do full Pinterest management. So I am like literally managing all your content and I'm putting it all on Pinterest. Well, I think that obviously provides a great return on investment. That's why I offer it as a service. You don't necessarily need to do the full thing to get benefits from Pinterest, because pins show up on Google too, right? So even if you just pin your podcast episodes, that can be a great way to get some traffic from Pinterest and also get those pins to boost the blog post and rank on Google higher. So it's a great strategy, even if you're not willing to go like all in on Pinterest, which obviously, again, that could be a whole other video on why I so deeply recommend that. But anyway, I digress. After your podcast episode, you've turned it into a blog. What are you going to do now? I recommend creating at least five-ish pins from your blog post and then putting them on Pinterest, put them to a few different boards, space them out like 1 to 2 days, and then have it promoting the episode, have them like go live for a long time. Like, and then if you're talking about something more timely, like let's say you're talking about like Christmas holiday traditions for entrepreneurs or something, set a little reminder in your ClickUp, in your Airtable, whatever you're using, to remind you to start making even like more fresh pins in September, October, whenever you're going to start pinning your Christmas content. It really is like so easy after you record a podcast episode to make pins for it. And like I said, you can have someone on your team do it. And then you can also use the same graphics. Like I think if you're going to promote your podcast on Instagram story size does really well on Pinterest, so I don't think it needs to be a separate task. It just has to be like taken one step further. And I absolutely think it's okay to use AI for the titles and descriptions. What I will do is I will put the whole blog post that I've just created in ChatGPT, be like, write in my brand voice, include these keywords. I do recommend going to Pinterest to like choose the keywords you want to rank for manually, like do your like look what's trending, look what's Pinterest is prompting for ideas, like that kind of thing. I do think that's worth the effort, but then ask it to write the pin titles and descriptions for you using those keywords that you've chosen. I think that that's totally fine. And then you can schedule those you can schedule those manually on Pinterest, or you can use something like Tailwind to make your process even easier. So those are my 2 ways to get more listeners from your podcast. And I know it might sound straightforward, but trust me, it makes a huge difference. And what's even more, like it works for a long time. Like this will get everyone that has a podcast already knows that yes, people will sign on each week to download the latest episode, but people will continue to listen to your old episodes. Like that is why sometimes your downloads will look so much higher, because the more content you have, the more people listening to the backlogged content, and it really does make a huge difference. And like podcasting, your work compounds over time. Like what you do on Pinterest, what you do on your blog, that compounds over time. This is what I'm talking about when I say build a bingeable brand, right? Like people will find you through one podcast and they'll keep listening to your podcast, or they'll keep reading your blog post, or they'll save the pin for later when they want to come back to it to dive more deep. Like it makes such a difference. It also builds your authority, which is really cool, especially if you are more established, but then also if you're not that established, it's a great way to feel like you have like a bulk of content, right? Like most people who are established in the industry, they have content, right? So this is a great way to start building yours in something that can be like repurposed. Because once you have a blog post, honestly, it's like you can turn that into a reel with text overlay, you can turn it into a carousel. You can do a lot with it. Honestly, you can pull out the best quotes, have it as a quote graphic. Like not only are you building like a true asset for your business, but it really gives your content an actual lifespan. And like I said, you can get them on your email list. You can get them to come follow you on Instagram, wherever you typically nurture people. But this is a great way to get more listeners for your podcast. So this is your reminder that you don't have to be everywhere. You just have to be searchable. That's what I could say over and over again. So anyway, right now you've got the blueprint. Let me know in the comments which podcast episode you're going to repurpose first. I would love to help you cheer you on. And if you want help turning your podcast into a blog, evergreen, Pinterest kind of funnel, definitely reach out. You can also grab, to help get you started, I have a blog post guide that sells, where I just break down my exact formula for writing blog posts that will actually sell your stuff, because I know you don't just want attention, you want sales. So I have exactly how to do that below.